Hey guys, tonight we step into the muddy boots of a medieval knight. Not in the middle of a glorious charge or a royal banquet, but on the cold, gray morning before the big battle. You know, that part they always skip in the movies. You're lying awake on a scratchy straw mattress, your armor clanking faintly every time you shift. The stone walls of the keep sweating dampness into your very bones. The fire has long gone out, your toes are cold, and you can already smell the tang of boiled cabbage drifting up from the lower kitchens. Outside, a heavy fog rolls low across the fields. And somewhere out there, men are sharpening spears and muttering prayers they half remember. You, meanwhile, are stuck wondering whether today's breakfast will include anything that doesn't taste like the bottom of a boot. The truth is, you probably won't survive this. Not the battle, necessarily, but the sheer monotony of pre-battle food. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere far off or wonderfully ordinary, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love to see who else is dozing off to tales of turnips and trench bread. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the keep's interior corridors, boots echoing against slick stone. It's still barely light out, and the castle smells like old tallow candles, damp wool, and something unmistakably meaty. The great hall is empty save for a few bleary-eyed servants placing cold pewter cups at long oak tables. You rub your eyes and wonder, not for the last time, what possessed you to become a knight? Chivalry sounded a lot more glamorous in the ballads. Your armor hangs off you in pieces. You're not fully strapped in yet, thank the saints, but even your padded gambeson is stiff with sweat and last week's gravy. You glance out one of the slit windows. The fog hugs the ground like a wet dog. In the distance, campfires from the foot soldiers flicker, and beyond that, just the vague dark smear of forest. That's where the enemy is. Probably. Or maybe they left during the night. Nobody seems to know. Your stomach growls, long and low like a dying bear. You haven't eaten since yesterday's supper, which featured some variety of boiled root, salt, and a questionable stew that may have included both pigeon and prune. You'd be angry, but you're too tired to be mad. That's sort of the theme around here. A nearby squire yawns so hard he almost drops the pair of greaves he's carrying. You squint at the bench he just sat on. Yes, it's still damp. Everything is damp. You sit anyway. The idea of what a knight eats before battle is, well, romanticized. People love to imagine massive feasts, boars with apples in their mouths, overflowing goblets, and servants feeding grapes into armored mouths. In reality, most knights ate like gloomy bachelors with mild food poisoning. On a normal day, you might get some pottage, think oatmeal, but sadder, and a slice of coarse bread. On a battle day, you might get 2 slices. Luxury. Historians still argue whether knights were intentionally underfed before battle to keep them lean and mean, or whether the feasting came after, assuming you didn't die in the mud with half a turnip in your hand. There's certainly no shortage of tales from chroniclers who insisted knights dined on nothing but virtue and adrenaline before a charge. Charming. But no. Eventually, you hear the clang of pots echoing from the kitchens below. Something is happening. You shuffle over to the lower hall, hoping to intercept breakfast. The air grows warmer as you descend, and the scent intensifies. Onions, barley, and the vague promise of meat, though that might just be wishful thinking. You peek into the kitchen. It's a frenzy. Scullions dash about with buckets, cooks argue about ladles, and a boy is crying over spilled porridge. Literally. A massive iron cauldron bubbles in the center, full of something beige. Very beige. One cook lifts a wooden spoon the size of a canoe paddle, stirs, and tastes. He nods grimly. That's breakfast. Then, pottage, Again, pottage was the go-to food for pretty much everyone. It's flexible. You throw in barley, water, onions, herbs, and whatever leftovers you can find. Sometimes meat, sometimes not. Sometimes peas, beans, cabbage, garlic, and if you're lucky, a bit of lard for flavor. Today's batch looks like it skipped the luck. You take a bowl and sit on a bench near the fire. It's warm, at least. The pottage has the consistency of wet clay and a faint, smoky taste that you hope is from the hearth and not the cook's shoes. You chew. It's there. Filling, not flavorful. But you need energy, right? A fellow knight plops down beside you with a grunt, slurping his own bowl. Could use some pepper, he mutters. You nod. Though pepper is roughly the cost of a week's wages, you could trade your belt for a few grains, if you really wanted. Better than the boiled radishes from last campaign. He adds. You both shudder in memory. Remember the one with the tiny fish inside? Don't. This is the knight's pre-battle ritual, quietly chewing beige goo in the near darkness, pretending it's a feast, and trying not to think about the hours ahead. Outside, the fog hasn't lifted. You hear the distant clatter of hooves, someone testing horses. Maybe. You finish your pottage and lick the spoon. Not because it's good, but because there won't be another meal until much later, if at all. There's a quiet moment as you both stare into the fire. You wonder if this was what being a warrior was supposed to feel like. Cold feet, a half-full belly, and an unshakable sense that someone somewhere just poisoned the water again. You think back to training days, when the Lord Steward would lecture about discipline, honor, and not stuffing your mouth before a joust. Food dulls the spirit, he would cry. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one getting hit with a mace. A flicker of warmth catches your eye. One of the cooks is sneaking a bit of meat into the pottage pot. A rabbit? A bird? Too fast to tell? Just as quickly. It disappears under the surface, and the cook ladles more beige over it like a secret. Will that lucky bite end up in your next bowl? Probably not. It never does. You stretch your back, muscles still stiff from sleeping in armor that was clearly designed by someone who hated spines. The fire's warmth clings to your tunic, but the moment you step away, the chill returns, sharp and damp, clinging like a wet cloth to your neck. The castle courtyard is waking now, reluctantly. Like an old dog with sore joints, you wander through the side corridor toward the chapel. It's not by choice. All knights are expected to attend morning mass, especially before a battle. Even if your mind is on breakfast, or what passed for it, you shuffle in with the others, ducking your head as you pass under the low stone arch. You're not particularly devout, but skipping mass today feels like asking for a crossbow bolt to the chest. The chapel is small, dim, and smells like cold wax and last Sunday's incense. The priest is already at the altar, muttering Latin that most of you only half understand. You find a bench, well, a plank, and kneel like you mean it. The wood creaks under your weight, and you wonder whether divine intervention includes fixing splinters in awkward places. Your knees ache. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, echoing off the chapel walls. A few knights around you glance over. One smirks. You shoot him a look that says, "I'll outlive you." Gregory. The priest drones on, eyes closed, arms raised. He's praying for protection, for courage, for mercy in the eyes of God. You're praying breakfast wasn't your only meal today. Just once. You'd like divine favor to come with a side of eggs, or cheese, or something that wasn't scraped out of a barley pot with a ladle the size of your forearm. But this is all part of the ritual. Mass before meat. Salvation before sustenance. Medieval society revolved around religion like moths around a particularly judgmental candle, especially before a battle. The thinking was, if you confessed and got absolution now, and you died later, your soul had at least a 50-50 chance of not being dragged screaming into the void. Cheery thought. Historians still argue whether these pre-battle masses were more about spiritual comfort or crowd control. Probably both. You pack 100 men into a room, feed them religious dread, and hope they don't question why they're risking their lives over a disputed goat pasture or the king's third cousin's marriage claims. Someone behind you coughs. You glance back and notice a monk seated farther off, scribbling in a book with a feather quill. That's Brother Anselm. He's documenting everything for posterity, or at least until someone spills wine on his parchment. You've seen him eat. He's one of those monks who claims gluttony is a sin, but somehow always ends up with second portions of smoked eel. Speaking of eels, as the mass ends and the knights begin to file out, you overhear a conversation between two squires near the cloister walk. Did you hear? The cook's got salted eel. Hiding it near the granary? Salted eel? No way. That's Lent food. Exactly. He's keeping it in case the bishop shows up. You raise an eyebrow. That's the thing about medieval kitchens. What went in and what came out didn't always match. Cooked food followed the rules of the church calendar only as closely as the kitchen staff felt like being watched, which wasn't often. You remember last summer, during a particularly long fast, someone found a stash of smoked fish in the stable hayloft. The steward insisted it was stored for medicinal purposes. Right? Very salty medicine. Today isn't a fasting day, thankfully, but that doesn't mean you're getting eel. Those delicacies tend to float mysteriously upward toward the noble end of the table, or disappear entirely. Outside, the morning fog still hasn't burned off. The courtyard is louder now, men shouting, blacksmiths hammering, horses snorting as they're saddled and brushed. You step into the light, blinking. The gray sky presses down on the earth like a damp ceiling. You can taste iron in the air, or maybe that's just your nerves. Nearby, a boy tugs a cart piled with baskets, apples, nuts, maybe a wedge of hard cheese if you're lucky. You consider intercepting one, but before you can make your move, the cart disappears behind a gate, reserved for the officers, no doubt. You adjust your belt, listen to the leather creak, and head toward the stables. The other knights are gathering. Some are already slipping into chainmail, others muttering over the tightness of their helmets. Everyone's pretending not to be nervous. You're not the only one whose stomach is still twisting, not just from hunger, but anticipation. There's something oddly sobering about knowing today might end with your face in the mud, and your best friend arguing over who gets your horse. Your own horse, a fine destrier named Garin, eyes you as you approach. He snorts and flicks his ears. He looks better fed than you, frankly, and cleaner. A stable hand is brushing his mane with more tenderness than you've ever received from another human. You can't even be jealous, it's impressive. What's he had this morning? You ask. The stable hand grins. Oats, hay, apple mash, bit of sweet clover. You blink. That's a feast. You had pottage, beige, oniony pottage. There's an old saying, in a good castle, the horses eat like lords. In a very good castle, so do the lords. You, on the other hand, are somewhere in the feudal food chain between the dog and the dairymaid's shadow. Still, you pat Garin on the neck. He deserves it. He's carrying you into battle, and if one of you survives, it'll probably be him. Across the courtyard, you hear the unmistakable sound of armor being strapped on, that hollow clink-clank of metal on metal. The slight grunt as someone tightens a buckle too hard. You sigh. The day is marching forward whether you're ready or not. Someone shouts, "Form up!" And the knights start filing toward the practice yard. Drills before battle. Because nothing soothes pre-combat anxiety like pretending you remember how to swing a sword in formation. You fall in line, belly still gnawing at itself, legs heavy, and start to march. But in your mind, you're still thinking about that salted eel, hidden somewhere, in a granary, behind some sacks of rye. One day, you swear, you'll taste it. The drills begin with the usual thudding predictability. Shields up, step forward, step back, swing low, swing high. Don't accidentally knock out your friend's teeth this early in the day. The yard is packed with bodies, all breathing heavy, all moving in unison, or trying to. You're keenly aware of the clank of your own boots on the hard-packed dirt and the faint creaking of the straps digging into your shoulders. Your stomach hasn't gotten the memo. It gurgles in protest as you pivot into another clumsy feint, louder this time, an audible complaint rising from somewhere beneath your chainmail shirt. Someone to your right snorts. "Didn't get your turn at the grain barrel this morning?" a knight asks, sidestepping your sloppy lunge. His name's Baldwin. Tall, smug, and irritatingly well-fed. His helmet gleams like he polished it for fun. You grunt. "I don't eat paste scraped off a pot's bottom unless I have to. Luxury," Baldwin says. "I'm lucky if mine's not still moving when I fork it." That's the kind of food humor knights tell themselves to cope with what they're actually eating. Usually barley porridge so bland it could double as wall mortar. Every now and then, though, you hear whispers of something better, something richer. The mythical pre-battle feast. Some nobles, it's said, actually sit down to roast swan. Real swan, not the kind that's half goose, half hope. Of course, if you're one of those nobles, you're probably not standing in this dirt yard, trying not to step in horse droppings during a shield bash demonstration. A wooden staff slams against the practice post, snapping your attention back. The marshal's watching now, arms crossed, looking like he's judging every clumsy parry you throw. "Again," he barks, and you and Baldwin clash once more, shields thudding, breath ragged. Somewhere in the yard, a squire drops a spear. The marshal doesn't even look over, just shouts. "Pick it up before I beat you with it." The sky is still that dull gray. It's been that way all morning. But now there's a shift in the wind. You smell it first. Wood smoke, fat, herbs. A slow drift of fragrance wafting from the kitchen yard. Something's cooking. Your nose twitches. So does Baldwin's. Kitchen's finally come to life, he mutters, breathing deep. That smells like onions, maybe beef? Or horse, you say, voice flat. He grimaces. "Don't joke. You're not." In leaner times, battlefield kitchens got creative. Once, after a brutal siege, you saw a cook boil leather boots for stew. Historians still argue whether that was for sustenance or psychological warfare. Feed your men their own shoes, and they'll either become fearless or feral. There's a pause in the drills. The marshal walks away to consult with a captain, and most of you drop your weapons with the exhausted clatter of people pretending they're not about to fall over. You roll your shoulders. Your arms ache. Your stomach twists again, this time in protest and anticipation. "Ever wonder what the king eats before battle?" Baldwin asks. You shrug. Probably something served on a gold plate by someone with all their teeth. You're not far off. At the top of the food pyramid in any medieval army was the royal or noble high table, where menus could include venison with ginger, spiced wine, sugar-dusted dates, and meat pies dense enough to fell a man in full-plate armor. For the rest of you, it's more like whatever can be boiled into a slurry and ladled out in wooden bowls that always seem to smell faintly of mildew and regret. You hear the kitchen bell clang, a low, resonant metal note that rings through the courtyard like a call to arms for your digestive tract. "That's first bell," Baldwin says, already taking a step toward the main keep. "That's for the officers. You're not invited to that round. But your time will come. Second bell is for the rest of the fighting men, and third bell is for the squires, stable hands, and people who are probably already chewing on raw cabbage behind the barn. Still, you linger near the gatehouse, hoping for a glimpse of what's being brought to the officers' mess. And then you see it. A large clay pot is being carried across the courtyard by two kitchen boys, wobbling dangerously as it steams from the top. One of them has a bandage on his hand, probably from burning it on the iron stove. You've been there. Medieval kitchens aren't quaint places with flower garlands and cheery ovens. They're loud, hot, smoky, and usually full of swearing. The smell follows them like a perfume trail. Rich, meaty, maybe even wine-soaked. A stew, probably, heavy with onions and root vegetables. Maybe some dried fruit tossed in for sweetness if the cook was feeling generous or bribable. You spot a hint of something red through the steam. Beetroot? Blood sausage? You lick your lips before catching yourself. You're not getting that pot. You're getting what's left after they scrape it clean with a wooden paddle and serve the thickened edge to the ranks. The part that sticks to the bottom, usually with a crust so stubborn it might outlive the war. You sigh, the second bell rings, and that's your cue. Time to march toward the lower kitchen door where a narrow line is already forming. Squires holding trays, grumbling sergeants, and a monk who's definitely not a soldier but has somehow ended up here with a bowl and a spoon. You join the line. It inches forward slowly, every man shuffling like a parade of stomachs in boots. The cook's voice booms from the doorway. "No pushing! If you rush the line, you get the ladle!" "Not the ladle," someone whispers behind you. Everyone's seen the ladle. It's not used for serving. It's used for correcting behavior. It's dented in 2 places from someone's helmet. Finally, it's your turn. The cook eyes you. "Full portion?" he asks, mock surprise in his voice. "Didn't think you'd survive drills." "Barely," you reply. He smirks and scoops a generous blob of something onto your trencher. A thick, brown mass flecked with soft onions and a suspicious number of stringy bits. You sniff it. Definitely meat. Possibly cow? Hopefully not rat. He adds a chunk of hard rye bread and then nods you on. You find a barrel to sit on, away from the worst of the wind, and dig in. It's hot, salty, and surprisingly satisfying. Maybe not swan or eel or gingered pheasant, but you're no longer hungry, and that counts for something. You tear into the bread and let your mind wander. You think of the nobles inside the stone hall, laughing over spiced pears and warm cheese, of the kitchen staff pulling tricks to hide better ingredients from the tax clerks, of the monks who kept entire hams under their robes during fast days, only to miraculously produce them at Easter. You glance down at your meal. There's a bone in it, picked clean. The dog sitting near your boots looks up at you. Hopeful. "Dream on," you mutter. He looks offended. Probably used to better scraps. As you finish the last bite, a trumpet sounds from the far wall. Drill's over. Orders will be given soon. The day is warming, slightly. You rise, stomach full, back aching, but spirits marginally lifted. And now you wait. You lean against the wall of the barracks, arms crossed over your still damp tunic, and feel the warmth of the food settle in your belly like a timid campfire. Not roaring, but enough to keep the chills away. The stew might have been stringy and suspicious, but it was hot. And in a medieval army, hot food is a rare and golden miracle, especially the day before battle. It's not exactly room service, but when your expectations have been thoroughly trampled by years of eating gray porridge, your standards develop a charming flexibility. Nearby, a cluster of men argues over a small sack of beans. Not cooked beans, dry ones. Someone is convinced they can roast them over a candle stub to make a snack. You watch as the sack owner lights the stub and holds it under a bean like he's about to summon some ancient bean spirit. It starts to blacken and pop. "See," he says, triumphant. "Almost like almonds. Almost like ashes," another mutters. In the background, someone's burping with the pride of a man who's clearly overindulged in trench stew. There's a rhythm to it. One long, one short. It echoes faintly off the stone. You close your eyes and lean your head back. The sun's breaking through the gray now, casting beams that slice through the camp's smoke like warm butter through stale bread. It lights the tops of the tents and the polished helmets stacked in rows near the armory. You think about dinner, or rather, whether dinner will exist at all tonight. Pre-battle meals are a delicate dance. Not too heavy. You don't want knights puking in their visors mid-charge, but not too light either. Or you'll have entire ranks fainting from hunger halfway through the morning bloodbath. A commander who doesn't understand this balance quickly earns a reputation, and not the good kind. Historians still argue whether the famed defeat at Nicopolis was due to poor strategy or an unfortunate incident involving spoiled salted herring. Some accounts say men were vomiting before they even reached the battlefield. A lovely image. Someone beside you sighs. Wish we got dried figs. Like the Romans. You crack one eye open. They also drank vinegar water and wiped their butts with communal sponges. He blinks. Fair. You push off the wall and begin walking. The camp is noisy, but in a half-hearted, anticipatory way. Not the full frenzy of morning drills, not the stillness of sleep, but the tense hum of waiting. There's a group of archers cleaning their arrows with animal fat. A pair of cooks arguing over whether they can reuse the broth from breakfast for a pottage tonight. A dog chases a chicken, and both vanish under a wagon wheel with the sort of chaotic blur you've grown numb to. You pass the apothecary tent, where a monk is grinding dried herbs. The smell hits you immediately. Pungent, earthy, and slightly bitter. Pennyroyal, maybe. He's mixing it into some kind of digestive, probably meant to cleanse the humors or hide the taste of something worse. The monk glances up. You look constipated. Just reflecting, you mutter. He nods like that's a symptom too. You don't stop, just keep weaving through the maze of the camp. You're on a sort of mental patrol now, watching, smelling, thinking. What will you eat if supplies run low? What did they pack for the march tomorrow? What, in the name of boiled cabbage? Is that smell? You turn a corner and nearly gag. There it is. The latrines. Even from a distance, the reek is monumental. The kind of odor that has shape. It punches you in the sinuses and whispers in your ear. You've made bad life choices. A pair of squires are standing guard nearby. Cloths wrapped around their faces. One is holding a bucket of lime and looking like he's about to cry. You salute their sacrifice silently and detour wide. You can still smell it hours later. It clings to the air like guilt. Back near the kitchen yard, the second cooking fire has been lit. Smoke rises in lazy curls, and with it, the scent of something slightly sweeter than before. You sniff. Could be carrots. Maybe dried apples if you're incredibly lucky. You peer into the kitchen tent. It's chaos inside. Cooks moving like a dance. If the dance involved knives, steam burns, and screaming. One woman is stirring an enormous pot with a paddle longer than your leg. Another is chopping onions so fast you're surprised she still has fingers. A small boy scuttles between them carrying handfuls of salt, like some frantic spice sprite. On a battered table, you spot something unusual. A bundle of herbs, tied with twine. Thyme? Rosemary? It smells real. Fresh. Not the dried-out twig dust that usually makes it into the stew. Where'd you get that? You ask the boy as he darts past. He doesn't stop. Priest's garden! You blink. You robbed a priest? He wasn't using it. Fair point. The presence of herbs is a good sign. It means someone cares. Or at least, someone's trying to make the last meal before possible death slightly more palatable. Because that's the truth sitting behind every bowl, every trencher, every hastily roasted rabbit. This might be the last thing you ever eat. No one says it out loud, of course. That would be unlucky. But it's there. In the careful way some men chew, as if memorizing the taste. In the way others eat fast and messy, like trying to get it over with. You remember one night, a huge, silent man named Gilles, who always carved a slice of his bread with a dagger and tucked it into a pouch. For the other side, he said. He wasn't being poetic. He meant literally for the afterlife. Thought St. Michael appreciated a good crust. Of course, he also thought owls were agents of the devil. So, grain of salt. Still, food is ritual, comfort, superstition, hope, And tomorrow, when you wake up to the trumpet's cry and the rustle of armor, you'll want to have something solid in your gut. Something that makes you feel a little more like a living man and a little less like a walking corpse. Someone claps you on the back. It's Baldwin again. He's holding a hunk of hard cheese the size of a goblet. Where did you get that? You ask, suddenly suspicious. He grins. Traded it with the quartermaster. For what? My boots. You stare at his feet. They're wrapped in cloth and hope. You're going into battle barefoot? No. I'm going to dinner barefoot, he says, biting into the cheese. Tomorrow I wear the bishop's spare shoes. Don't ask how I arranged that. You shake your head. Want a bite? He offers. You hesitate, then nod. He breaks off a piece, and it's dry, sharp, and tastes faintly of dust and victory. You chew slowly. It's good. It's really good. Sometimes that's enough. As the sun starts to dip and the shadows grow long, the kitchen boys light the last of the fires. Pots simmer. Trenchers are stacked, and wooden spoons are handed out like battle flags. You watch the flames dance and try not to think too far ahead, because tomorrow is for steel and screams. Tonight, you eat. The fire crackles quietly now, low and steady, throwing pale orange halos against the canvas walls of the mess tent. You sit cross-legged on a flattened bundle of straw, wooden bowl in hand, watching the stew steam rise in ghostly tendrils. It's thicker than you expected, lumpy in a comforting sort of way, like a soup that's had enough. Tonight's flavor is barley, and what might be leeks, or grass, or someone's attempt at recreating leek from memory after having seen it once on a monastery windowsill. You take a bite and chew slowly. The truth is, this could be worse. It has been worse. You remember a night 2 winters ago, before a minor skirmish in the south, when you and a handful of knights were served something that tasted suspiciously like boiled leather. The camp cook insisted it was salted hare. You all insisted he was lying. That cook no longer works in food preparation. He now sharpens pikes. The stew tonight isn't exactly a banquet, but at least it doesn't fight back. Across from you, 2 young squires attempt to share 1 trencher of black bread without coming to blows. It's a thick disc, half stale and spotted with flour, carved from a wheel that looks like it could stop a crossbow bolt. They tear it awkwardly, one eye on the bread, the other on each other's fingers. There's a science to surviving a medieval meal without either bleeding or starving. Bread, in particular, has been a cornerstone of your sustenance for years now. The church might call Christ the bread of life, but in this camp, actual bread feels like the holier relic. Some historians argue that bread wasn't just food, it was a ranking system. The whiter your loaf, the higher your standing. Nobles got fine manchet or cheat. Soldiers and squires like you got something closer to livestock feed. Coarse, dark, and usually riddled with weevils bold enough to demand rent. Look at this, Baldwin mutters, showing you a chunk of his crust. That's a leg. It's extra protein, you reply flatly. He shrugs and eats it anyway. It's not just bread, though. You've also been fed things that defy logical structure. Take peas pottage, for example. A medieval staple so murky and thick that it often came in a scoopable brick. It was, essentially, mashed peas boiled into submission. With enough salt and ale, you could convince yourself it was edible. Without those? Well, there's always prayer. The thing about pre-battle eating is, everyone's nervous. You try not to be. You tell yourself it's just another march, another day. But you see it in the hands, how they tremble slightly when tearing meat. You hear it in the forced laughter around the fire. Pitched too high. Everyone pretending they're not thinking about whether their intestines will still be inside their bodies tomorrow. That's why the quartermaster walks around with extra rations tonight. Not because he's generous, but because he knows full bellies make quiet soldiers. And quiet soldiers don't start bar fights over onions. You spot him now. Thin, sharp-faced, with a ledger clutched in one hand and a satchel of dried turnips in the other. He looks like a man constantly expecting someone to accuse him of theft. Possibly because he has been accused of theft several times. He stops near your fire and drops a small sack at Baldwin's feet. "Dried fruit," he mutters. "Pilfered from the monastery." Baldwin perks up. "Plums?" The quartermaster snorts. "Raisins? Plums with aspirations. You grab a few and toss them into your stew. They plump slightly in the heat and soften the flavor just enough to fool your tongue. It's not bad." Someone starts humming nearby. A soft tune. No words. Maybe a lullaby. It drifts in and out with the breeze, joining the hiss of the fires, the scrape of wooden bowls. A few heads nod in rhythm. No one wants to say it out loud. But this quiet moment of warm food and human sounds might be the best part of the entire campaign. Of course, nothing ruins peace like a visiting noble. Sir Raynault arrives with his usual entourage of absurdity. A boy with a comb, a man with a fur-lined stool, and an actual taster, because God forbid he accidentally eats what you're eating. He marches past your fire without looking down and demands roast capon with sage, as if this is a high feast at the king's table instead of a field tent half covered in mud. The cooks scowl behind his back. He won't get capon, but he'll probably get chicken. Probably. Some of those birds look a little too enthusiastic to be regular poultry. You mutter to Baldwin, "Wouldn't it be funny if they served him one of those bean-roasted ones from earlier?" He grins. "Only if it explodes?" Meanwhile, the knights around you start making small talk in that anxious, empty way. Someone speculates about weather. Someone else wonders whether boiled chestnuts really do improve stamina. Someone quotes a bishop who claimed apples weaken the blood. One knight loudly claims that he only eats garlic before a battle. "It keeps the spirits away," he says. "Or the ladies," another knight mutters, sniffing. Historians still argue whether garlic was used more for flavor or folk magic. Some old records suggest warriors rubbed it on weapons for strength. Others say it was to ward off illness, or vampires, depending on how rural your village was. You personally think garlic improves everything except romantic prospects. Further down the fire, a traveling mercenary is showing off a little pouch of spice. Real spice. Cinnamon, maybe? Or pepper. Either one would be ludicrously expensive, almost suspiciously so. He claims it was a gift from a Spanish noble. More likely, it was liberated during a skirmish. But no one questions it. Not because they believe him, but because no one wants to be questioned when they show off their own loot. That's the unspoken agreement among soldiers. Lies are fine, as long as they're interesting. The mercenary sprinkles a pinch into his bowl, stirs it slowly, and then eats with exaggerated care. "Tastes like victory," he announces. "Tastes like privilege," someone says. You wipe your bowl clean with a piece of trencher, scraping up every last trace of stew. The bread's gone gummy, but it does the job. Afterward, you suck on one of the dried raisins. It's chewy, sweet, and still a little gritty. You imagine it was once part of a proper feast. You imagine it had a past life, sitting in a gilded bowl on some noblewoman's table, being ignored in favor of roast peacock and marzipan. Now it's here, in your mouth, mixed with traces of barley and desperation. The fire pops suddenly. Sparks spiral upward. A knight next to you jumps slightly. You smirk. "Still think apples weaken the blood?" He glares and mutters something about St. George. The moon is rising now, round and quiet, casting pale light across the camp. You can see your breath in the air, the way it curls and vanishes. All around you, men are starting to settle. Some lie back against their packs. Others polish buckles. A few just stare into the fire, eyes glassy. You feel your stomach give a tiny lurch. Not from food, from nerves. The stew sits fine, but your body knows what's coming. You sigh and lean back, watching the stars emerge one by one. Tomorrow is coming, no matter what's in your bowl, and you'll face it with whatever's left in your gut, be it courage, barley, or garlic breath. Sleep doesn't come easily in a night's camp, especially not the night before a battle. You lie on your back, cloak pulled over your shoulders, helmet resting beside you like a silent dog. Around you, the murmurs have quieted into the soft chorus of shifting straw, distant coughing, and the occasional clatter of someone kicking a helmet in their sleep. But your stomach is oddly content. The stew, gritty and lumpy as it was, has settled. A small victory, and you begin to think, really think, about what food even means out here. Not just survival, not just warmth in your belly, but the strange rituals that surround it. The rules, the patterns, the beliefs. Because the closer you get to battle, the more those beliefs start to tighten around you like an invisible rope. This isn't just a stew. It's part of the routine. And in war, routine becomes sacred. Take, for instance, the men who won't eat before a fight. You know a few. One of them is the wiry archer with the shaved head, who always carries his own dried oats. Every time you ask him why he doesn't eat dinner before combat, he says the same thing. If I'm meant to die, I'll do it on an empty stomach. Easier to bury. Charming. Another knight, a lanky, sour-looking man from the northern fens, believes eating before battle makes your blood sluggish. You want to be light, he insists. Springy, like a frog. This from a man who once tripped over his own scabbard. But his superstition isn't uncommon. Many believe too much food before a fight will weigh down your limbs or distract your instincts. Historians still argue whether fasting before battle was a tactical decision or a spiritual one. Probably both. The medieval mind didn't draw clear lines between stomach and soul. And then there's you. You've always eaten before battle. Maybe it's your superstition, that hunger is a bad omen, that an empty belly leads to an empty grave. You've heard it said that even Richard the Lionheart used to gorge himself on dates and preserved figs before a charge, believing the sugar gave him divine focus. Others say he just liked figs. The line between faith and fondness gets blurry fast when you're one blow away from eternity. Of course, not all pre-battle meals are equal. One particularly memorable campaign had you stationed near a priory for several weeks. The monks, perhaps out of pity or some ill-placed admiration, offered the knights a meal before the big push. It was humble. Lentils, goat cheese, spiced carrot broth. But the care with which it was served, and the quiet, measured words of the abbot, made the experience feel like a sort of sacrament. The soldiers walked away calmer. Not because they were ready to die, but because someone had reminded them they were still human. Not that such reverence is always the case. The same campaign also featured a lord who insisted on eating partridge glazed in honey before leading a cavalry charge. He threw it up somewhere around the third volley of arrows. Food before battle, it turns out, is a gamble. It's still dark when you wake from your half-sleep. The sky's starting to pale at the edges, turning the clouds from navy to bruised lilac. Fires have burned down to faint glows. A few men are already up, silently adjusting straps and wiping blades clean with rags that will never truly be clean again. You sit up slowly and chew a piece of hard bread from your pouch. It's gone tougher overnight. You dunk it in a leftover sip of ale just to soften it. It doesn't help. You watch as the squires begin their quiet dance, fetching water, laying out armor, whispering with cracked voices. One is boiling something over a small flame, a thin morning gruel of oats and water. He stirs it like it's fragile, like it might break if he moves too fast. You walk over and nod at the pot. Any chance that's edible? Not unless you hate yourself, he replies, but hands you a cup anyway. The warmth is worth it, even if the taste is not. It coats your mouth in a bland film, like someone dissolved a biscuit in mud. But it calms your stomach. For now, the gruel is, in fact, fairly standard morning fare. Oats were one of the few reliable grains in the medieval world, especially in colder climates where wheat sulked and barley through tantrums. Soldiers often carried small bags of oats or crushed grain to mix with water and whatever else they could find. Honey, milk if you were very lucky, or beer if your commander was inattentive. One knight once mixed his gruel with sheep's blood and said it was the taste of resolve. That knight, you later found out, grew up in a village where blood pudding was breakfast. You don't judge. The strange thing is, there's an almost monastic rhythm to this moment. The quiet, the food, the sky peeling open like parchment. You chew your gritty breakfast and feel a strange calm settle into your chest. For a second, it's possible to forget where you are, but then someone drops a helmet with a clang, and the illusion shatters. The knight next to you curses softly and picks it up. He's young, too young. His hands shake as he straps it under his arm. You offer him the last of your gruel. He nods, gulps it, and manages a weak, "Thanks. No sense dying hungry?" you say with a shrug. He tries to laugh. It doesn't quite work. Further down the camp, the cooks are preparing what passes for a battle breakfast. It's more of the same. Thick porridge, maybe some dried fruit stirred in for flavor. You hear someone asking about honey. The response is laughter. "Honey? We're lucky we have bowls." Another soldier offers a slice of cold meat, possibly salted boar, though it smells more like fish. No one questions the origin. They just chew, slowly, thoughtfully. Every movement this morning is slower, heavier, as if the weight of the coming day has settled on everyone's shoulders like a wool cloak soaked in rain. And still, people eat, because food isn't just fuel right now. It's a way to delay the inevitable. Every bite, every chew, every pointless complaint about texture. It's a small rebellion against what waits beyond the hill. You remember a tale a priest once told you, about a knight who refused to eat the morning of his final duel. "My last meal will be the light of heaven," he supposedly said. He was killed in 2 strikes. Afterward, his squire ate both their rations. A lesson in practicality, if nothing else. There are no saints here, just men trying to digest and delay. You finish your gruel and rinse the cup with a few drops from your water skin. You pack it away, and then you stand, armor creaking, joints popping. You feel heavier than you should. Not just because of the mail shirt, or the helmet, or the thick belt dragging at your hips, but because now the food has done its job. It's given you one more night, one more dawn, one more bite of comfort. And now there's nothing left to do, except face whatever's next. You strap your sword to your side, fasten your gloves. You glance at the young knight, who is still chewing something from his pouch. Eyes distant. He catches your glance. "Last bite," he says. You nod. "Make it count." You're walking now, slowly, deliberately, toward the edge of the camp, where horses snort and armor clinks like wind chimes made of iron. The mood is solemn, but not silent. It never is. There's always someone muttering, always a squire mumbling a misplaced prayer, always the scrape of a whetstone or the choked sound of someone retching behind a cart. And right now you can smell meat. You didn't expect it. Most days before battle don't come with roast anything, let alone a scent so rich and savory that your mouth remembers hunger all over again. But there it is, drifting on the breeze, curling between tents, cutting through the usual odor of sweat, mud, and nervous anticipation. You follow it instinctively, like a dog might. Turns out, it's coming from the camp kitchen, or what passes for it. A few iron tripods hold blackened pots above flickering fires. A heap of cabbages, split turnips, and root vegetables slumps in a corner. And in the center, on a spit too large for one man to turn alone, something glorious roasts, a whole pig, glistening and spinning, fat hissing into the coals like a soft applause. "You're not hallucinating," says a knight beside you. "It's real, and it is." What you're witnessing is something that happens rarely but memorably. A morale feast. Not a feast in the castle banquet hall sense, No silver plates or candied almonds, but a hot meal built around meat, served with purpose, a commander's gesture, a gamble to calm hearts and tighten bonds. It's hard to say when this tradition began. Some historians argue it dates back to Roman legion customs, when soldiers would receive a meal of roasted meat and wine before marching into uncertainty. Others say it came from the Franks, or maybe just evolved naturally. You feed the men. They feel seen. They might even fight harder, or at least die slightly happier. There's a peasant cook directing the whole scene, his voice hoarse but cheerful. He ladles broth into thick wooden bowls, tossing in bits of barley and chopped leeks. You overhear him explain the stew has bones boiled for over a day. A luxury out here. No one cares what animal the bones belonged to. That's not the point. One soldier nearby jokes, "If we win, I'll ask for the recipe. If you live, I'll give it to you." The cook replies without looking up. You smirk. Grim humor is the only kind on offer today. You sit cross-legged on the ground, warming your hands around a bowl of the rich stew. It's scalding, but you welcome the sting. The flavors are deeper than usual, more layered, like someone cared. There's salt, garlic, even a hint of spice. Clove? Maybe? You can't tell. But it pulls you out of your head and into the present, where meat juices stain your chin and the broth fogs your helmet. And across from you, the other knights do the same. No one talks about the battle, not directly, but they eat more slowly, more deliberately, as if the flavor itself is holy. And maybe it is, because eating before battle isn't just about strength, it's about ceremony. You do it to mark time, to say, "This is the last thing I will do before the world changes." Some knights, you've heard, request specific dishes before major charges. A cut of lamb, a boiled egg, even a hunk of hard cheese wrapped in linen by a mother they haven't seen in years. And woe to the squire who misplaces it. Food becomes memory made solid, a bite of safety. The young knight again. He's still nearby. He's picked at his stew, poking it with the handle of his spoon. You give him a look. "Eat it," you say. "You'll miss it later." He tries, swallows a chunk of carrot like it's gravel, nods. Nearby, two squires argue about the pig. One insists it was caught wild in the forest. The other says it was stolen from a monastery. Their cook's still looking for it. He grins. "Maybe we'll find him on the field," someone says flatly. It's strange, the mixture of camaraderie and dread, laughter and quiet chewing, the occasional glance toward the hills where the enemy waits. Always waiting. You wonder what they're eating. Historians still argue whether enemy camps mirrored each other this closely. Did both sides roast meat the night before, hoping it would bring luck? Did they share the same fear-dampened appetite? The same superstition that you never clean your bowl too well, lest you tempt fate? One odd tradition you recall. In some regions, knights would bury a small piece of their food beneath the soil before battle. A bite for the dead, they called it, an offering, or a bribe to whatever spirits might be watching. You did it once, buried a dried fig under your boot print. You lived that day. Maybe it worked. The cook announces he's made a second round of stew. This one thicker. Some call it victory soup, a hopeful name if there ever was one. You go back for a second helping. Might as well. As you slurp, you spot an old man sitting near the edge of the circle, barefoot, bearded, dressed in patchwork leather. He's not a knight, not a squire, not a cook, probably a camp follower. No one seems to know who invited him. He eats slowly, with both hands cupped around his bowl like it's gold. You catch his eye. "Good?" you ask. He smiles, revealing 2 teeth. Better than dying. Fair point. You sip the last of your stew and wipe your mouth with the back of your glove. Someone passes around strips of dried apple. Another soldier pulls out a single piece of honeycomb, breaks it, and shares it with the men around him. A tiny, sticky communion. Everything feels exaggerated today. Every bite more meaningful. Every flavor more vibrant. Even the salt tastes like memory. The sun is rising properly now, casting long shadows across the field. Shadows of spears, of tents, of men moving with stiff urgency. Horses are being saddled. Armor is tightened, and someone, impossibly, is still eating. You recognize the scent again. Meat, smoke, spice. The pig is nearly gone now, just bones turning slowly, and the last scraps are being sliced off by a squire with a dagger far too nice for the task. You want one more bite? You walk over. He sees your look, nods, and flicks you a charred chunk the size of your thumb. It's still hot, crisped at the edges, tastes like courage or desperation. Hard to tell. You chew slowly. It's your last bite before the drums start. Before the shouting. Before the line moves forward and the world narrows into a tunnel of noise and blood and blur. But for this moment, it's just meat. Savory, smoky, real. And then it's gone. You stand now, your stomach just full enough to feel slightly guilty. The warmth of that last meal is already fading, replaced by the stiff breeze of dawn and the quiet rattle of steel nerves. Around you, knights stretch, grumble, and adjust straps that have already been adjusted twice. But something odd is happening. You notice it first in the way a squire fusses with his master's surcoat, smoothing it out like he's preparing him for a parade rather than a charge into chaos. Then it's the way a knight sits cross-legged, polishing his sword, not just sharpening it, but polishing it, with the same delicate reverence someone might use to clean a wine glass after a feast. They're preparing, but not for fighting. Not yet. They're preparing for show. See, before the thundering hooves, before the earth shakes and the sky splits open with the sound of war horns, knights perform a quieter ritual. They dress, and not just in armor, in pride, in color, in the kind of visual theater that says, "Look at me. I am not afraid." Even if you are, especially if you are. You look down at your own gear. Mail hauberk, worn but intact. Tunic in your house colors, mud-stained but serviceable. Helmet, dented from some past skirmish but still protective. And your surcoat. Well, it could use brushing. There's time. Knights, contrary to what movies would have you believe, didn't just toss on a suit of plate like it was a tracksuit. Layering armor was a process, a collaborative one. Your squire, red-faced and underslept, helps you now. First the gambeson, thick, quilted, smelling faintly of horse and stale sweat. It's the base layer, padding your body against the cold, and more importantly, the bruising bite of metal. Then, mail. Long, heavy, itchy in the worst places. You groan softly as it settles over your shoulders like a wet iron cloak. Your squire is mumbling, something about a missing strap. You nod without listening, and then the plate begins. Bit by bit. Cuisses for your thighs, greaves for the shins, vambraces for the arms. Your squire's hands shake slightly as he buckles each one. He's 15. This might be his first. You wonder if he's more afraid for you or for himself. You crack a weak joke about how he better not mix up your left and right gauntlet again. He forces a laugh, which is enough. Now the helmet. You hesitate. Once it's on, it changes everything. Sound dulls, vision narrows, the world becomes smaller, heavier, more focused, more terrifying. But for now, you leave it under your arm, because now it's time for heraldry. That's what's happening around you, the real business of the morning. Banners are being raised, silken standards painted in colors that shout from across a battlefield. Crimson lions, golden crosses, blue chevrons, silver stars. If you've ever wondered how a knight found his friends in a sea of blood and metal, here's your answer. One knight has his crest embroidered onto the back of his cloak. Another carries a wooden shield painted with painstaking detail, a bear rearing on hind legs, claws out, tongue bright red. Your own sigil, an ox with a golden crown, feels almost comical in the light of day. But it's yours. A fellow knight claps you on the back. His armor gleams unnaturally bright. Someone must have spent an hour polishing it. You raise an eyebrow. Planning to blind the enemy? You ask. He grins. Better than dying ugly, which might be the entire point. Looking good before battle wasn't about vanity. Not entirely. It was identity. It was defiance. It was claiming space in a moment designed to erase you. Some historians argue that a knight's heraldic colors served a tactical role, organizing troops, signaling command structures. Others say it was more psychological, dressing up to convince both yourself and your comrades that you were more than a man, that you were part of a tradition, a name, a story that might outlast the battle itself. And sometimes, yes, it was ego. Let's not pretend knights were all stoic saints. You've seen some with feathers tall enough to knock over low-hanging branches. One guy, no kidding, wore a gold-painted lobster on his helmet. Historians still debate whether it was satire or genuine fashion. You're leaning toward fashion. Nearby, you see a priest moving among the knights, anointing a few with holy water. His voice is quiet but firm. He places a hand on each helmet, says a quick blessing, and moves on. Some receive it solemnly. Others avoid his gaze. There's always a moment, right around now, when the joking stops. You feel it. It's like a sigh that passes through the entire camp at once. The final checks begin. A knight tests the grip on his sword, then sheathes it. Another tightens the straps on his greaves again, though they haven't come loose. Horses are saddled. Reins are adjusted. A squire offers you your helmet. You take it. You fasten the chin strap slowly, feeling the soft scrape of leather against your jaw. The world muffles. Vision narrows to a letterbox slit. Your breathing echoes inside the steel dome. It's happening. You glance at your comrades. No more jokes now. You feel your heartbeat in your ears. Your breath fogs the inside of your visor. But there's still a moment left. A small, flickering one. And in that moment, you remember something a monk once told you. Before you put on your helmet, ask yourself who you're fighting for, because you may not get to ask again. Who are you fighting for? Your family? Your name? A king you've never met? A land you barely recognize without snow on the hills? Or maybe, for the squire still clutching your scabbard with both hands, eyes wide. You don't answer. You can't. The horns begin to sound, slow and deep, the kind of sound that crawls up your spine and settles behind your ribs. It's time. Banners flutter. Men mount horses. Feet shift in the dirt. And then, out of the corner of your eye, you spot one knight kneeling quietly in the dirt. His hands are clasped. He's praying, or pretending to. Or maybe he just dropped something. Historians still argue whether such displays were more for God or for show. You decide it doesn't matter. You lower your visor. Everything goes dark for half a second. And then light filters through the slit again. The world returns. But different. Sharper, smaller, real. You're ready? Or as ready as anyone can be. You move forward now, with the rest of the line. The ground hard beneath heavy boots and horses pawing impatiently. The morning chill clings to your skin, mixing with the metallic tang of your own sweat. The battlefield looms ahead like a vast, quiet beast, waiting to be awakened. You can feel the weight of your armor pressing down, a reminder of the protection it offers and the limitation it imposes. Movement is measured, deliberate, the clink and clatter of metal echoing faintly in your ears. And as you march, you think about food. Strange, maybe, but hunger is a constant companion. You're reminded of the last meal, the pig roasting over open flames, the thick stew that felt like a warm hug in the cold dawn. Turns out, What knights ate before battle wasn't just about filling bellies. It was strategic. Your body needs fuel, sure, but it also needs the right kind. Historians tell us that before a fight, knights favored foods that provided slow-burning energy. Stews thick with grains like barley or oats, salted meats that could keep without refrigeration, and dense breads that wouldn't upset their stomachs. Something to keep them going for hours. You remember the irony. Knights spent weeks preparing their armor and weapons. But what about their stomachs? Food wasn't just fuel. It was part of their armor in its own right. Oddly, some knights avoided fresh fruit or vegetables right before battle. They feared stomach troubles, cramps, diarrhea, or any mishap that could leave them vulnerable. Instead, they favored cured meats, cheeses, and dried grains. You wonder if this was more superstition or practical sense. One unusual tidbit. In some medieval camps, soldiers ate a kind of hard, dense biscuit called a hardtack. It was so tough that a popular joke was that it could be used as a weapon if food ran out. You try imagining chewing on something like that as you ride forward. Historians still argue whether hardtack was really eaten pre-battle or reserved strictly for long marches. As you advance, you glance at your comrades. Faces set, eyes narrowed, some adjusting straps, others closing their eyes briefly. You catch a glimpse of a knight biting into a piece of dried sausage, hard, salty, and perfect for quick energy. Nearby, a squire munches nervously on a handful of nuts. You smile faintly. Turns out, nuts are a great pre-battle snack, packed with fats and protein, easy to carry, and quick to eat. You've read that some knights prized walnuts or almonds for this very reason. One old chronicler even wrote about a knight who carried a small pouch of hazelnuts in his belt, claiming they kept his spirit bright and steady. The day stretches before you, tense and heavy. You think back to the campfire stories about special pre-battle drinks. 2. Ale was common, though knights had to be careful not to overdo it. Too much, and you'd be less steady on your horse. Some preferred wine diluted with water, believing it sharpened the mind. Others swore by herbal concoctions, mixtures that included rosemary or thyme, to calm nerves. Whether any of these actually worked, historians still debate. Some say the alcohol was more likely to cause trouble than help. Your thoughts drift to the odd rituals some knights practiced with food. One story you heard was about a knight who ate a raw onion before battle, believing it would ward off poison and illness. Another tale involved swallowing a whole boiled egg to strengthen the stomach. You've tried the egg once. It wasn't pleasant, but if it meant staying alive, maybe it was worth it. The line stops moving. Ahead, the enemy waits. Flags snap in the wind. The smell of earth and sweat thickens. You adjust your grip on the reins. Feel your horse tense beneath you. Your stomach churns. Not from hunger, but anticipation. You remind yourself of that warm stew. The pig's crispy skin. The smell of roasted meat still lingering faintly in your memory. It's strange how food becomes comfort, even now, at the edge of chaos. As the battle horn sounds, sharp and insistent, you take a deep breath through your helmet. And remember, no matter what happens next, you ate well today. The battle begins with a roar that seems to shake the very sky. You can hardly hear your own thoughts as the lines surge forward, horses pounding, metal clashing, and the earth trembling beneath your feet. But in the midst of this chaos, your body recalls what you ate this morning. The slow-burning grains, the salted meat, the dense bread that sat heavily but steadily in your stomach. It's a strange kind of comfort amid the madness. You remember, oddly enough, that food was part of a knight's mental preparation as well as physical. Before a fight, knights often took moments to eat something small and familiar. A bite of bread, a piece of cheese, something that reminded them of home or simpler times. One knight, chronicled in an old manuscript, was said to have carried a small loaf of bread baked by his mother. keeping it tucked inside his armor as a talisman. He never ate it, but the smell alone steadied his nerves. Historians still argue whether such tokens were common or rare personal quirks. Your own stomach is surprisingly calm despite the adrenaline. The stew you had hours ago is doing its job, slow and steady like the heartbeat beneath your armor. Yet, amid the pounding and clashing, your mind drifts to the odd side of medieval battle nutrition. Did you know that some knights chewed on peppercorns before a fight? Not for flavor, but because they believed it stimulated their senses and sharpened their focus. You try to imagine how spicy little beads of pepper would feel grinding under your teeth as you raise your sword. And then there's the legend of the battleberry, a mysterious fruit that some knights supposedly ate to boost courage and strength. Whether the battleberry was a real thing or just a poetic invention is lost to time, but it's a perfect example of how food and superstition blended in medieval warfare. Your gaze catches a squire nearby, nervously gnawing on a piece of salted pork. You chuckle softly, thinking how different this is from the protein bars and energy gels soldiers use today. Back then, it was all about preservation, food that could survive weeks in a saddlebag without spoiling. Salt was king. Salted meats, salted fish, hard cheeses, and yet, not everything was bland and tough. Some knights managed to sneak in fresh foods when possible, fresh fruit, eggs, even honey, to give a quick boost of energy and morale. Honey, in particular, was prized, sweet, sticky, and packed with calories. It was often used to coat bread or dissolve in water for a quick energy drink. You wonder if you had any honey this morning? Probably not. You had the stew. The battle rages around you, but your focus narrows. You're not just fighting with sword and shield, you're fighting with every bite you took before dawn. One more thing to think about before the next charge: hydration. You'd be surprised how much knights struggled with water during long battles. Carrying water was heavy and bulky. So many relied on ale or wine diluted with water to keep them going. The alcohol helped kill bacteria, but didn't exactly hydrate well. Historians debate how much this affected stamina and performance. Some argue it was negligible. Others say it was a hidden danger on the field. You pat the small leather flask at your side, wondering what's inside. Whatever it is, it's probably better than nothing. Suddenly, a shout. Your squadron moves. You grip the reins tighter, heart pounding. The battle is far from over. But for now, your body thanks you for the food that's keeping you steady. As the battle wears on, your muscles ache beneath the weight of your armor. But there's a steady rhythm to it now. The clash, the parry, the grunt, the shout. You start to appreciate the simple things, like how the meal you had hours ago is still quietly fueling you, even as your breath comes hard and fast. You recall the texture of that bread from earlier, dense and hearty, nothing like the fluffy loaves from a baker's shop in town. This was bread made to last, sometimes baked twice to be extra hard, almost like a weapon in itself. It's what soldiers called hardtack, a biscuit so tough you could swear it was made of stone. Legend has it that some knights used hardtack as a makeshift hammer if they ran out of weapons, though historians still debate whether that's more a joke than reality. You chew on a small piece now, dry and crumbly, wishing for a sip of water to wash it down. Interestingly, you remember how medieval cooks sometimes soaked hardtack in broth or wine to soften it before eating. It's like the medieval version of a soggy cereal, if cereal was made of brick. Speaking of broth, soup or stew was a big part of the knight's pre-battle menu, thick with root vegetables, beans, and salted meat. It provided not just calories, but warmth and comfort. One curious detail: some camps brewed a thick, porridge-like gruel that was sometimes mixed with animal fat and honey. It wasn't the tastiest meal, but it packed a punch of energy. You wonder how they managed to cook such meals in the chaos of a marching army. Campfires had to be quick, cooks had to be fast, and you suspect there were a lot of burned pots in the mix. Then again, The smell of stew simmering over a fire must have been a small beacon of normalcy for weary soldiers. Historians still argue whether the typical knight had the luxury of a hot meal before every battle, or if many had to settle for cold rations. Looking down, you spot a piece of dried fruit tucked in your pouch. A small luxury, a reminder that knights weren't just warriors but also humans who craved sweetness. Dried fruits like figs, dates, and raisins were prized because they provided quick energy and could survive long travels. Plus, they made a nice contrast to the saltiness of cured meats. You take a bite, the sweetness bursting on your tongue like a tiny celebration. A squire nearby eyes your fruit enviously, chewing on a tough chunk of jerky. Meat was essential, but fresh cuts were rare. Most of the time, you were eating salted or dried meats, beef, pork, or sometimes even fish. The preservation methods meant the meat could be stored without refrigeration, but it came at the cost of texture and taste. You remember an old story of a knight who once got so desperate he ate a salted fish so hard it chipped his tooth. Ouch! Still, it was better than hunger. Hydration, again, is a concern. You wipe sweat from your brow, grateful for the small flask of watered-down wine you carry. Some knights believed that wine improved their courage, while others thought it dulled their senses. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Historians continue to debate how alcohol consumption affected battle performance. Your mind wanders to one of the stranger medieval foods you've heard about. A medicinal drink made from fermented honey, herbs, and spices called mead. It was sweet, potent, and believed to have healing properties. Some knights sipped mead to calm their nerves before battle, or to recover afterward. Whether it actually helped or just lifted spirits is uncertain. The clang of swords jolts you back to the present. The fight rages on, but you feel a steady strength inside, fed by every morsel you've swallowed this day. Sometimes you think surviving a battle wasn't just about bravery or skill. It was about having a good cook and a full belly. You glance at your armor again and smile beneath your helmet. Food might just be the most underrated part of your kit. Your body is battered, but your mind drifts to the strange culinary quirks that accompanied medieval warfare. You've noticed the subtle rhythms of battle, yet somehow, thoughts of food linger even here, beneath a sky darkened by smoke and dust. You recall the curious role of spices in a knight's diet before battle. Not just for flavor, though medieval cuisine could be surprisingly spiced, but also for preserving food and masking the taste of salt-cured meat. Black pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were prized commodities, often more valuable than gold. Some knights took their pepper so seriously, they carried tiny pepper bags in their saddlebags, sprinkling it on food to make it more palatable. You imagine the scent of warm cinnamon wafting from a stew pot in a smoky campfire kitchen. Historians still argue how widespread spice use was among ordinary knights. Some suggest spices were a luxury reserved for nobility, while others believe common soldiers enjoyed more variety than we often assume. You remember a quirky account of a knight who mixed a pinch of ground pepper into his drinking water, believing it would ward off stomach ailments during battle. Whether it helped or just irritated the poor man's throat is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, salt was king of preservation. You think back to the cured meats you've eaten. Dry, tough, and salty enough to make your tongue pucker. The salt wasn't just for taste, it was survival. Without it, food would spoil quickly, and no one wanted to risk the stomach troubles that came with bad meat. Some soldiers reportedly carried salt tablets to chew on, much like we use electrolyte tablets today. You glance at your own satchel and wonder if you packed enough salt. Then there's the matter of liquids, hydraulic as well as alcoholic. Ale and beer were common, safer to drink than water, which was often contaminated. The alcohol content was low enough to hydrate without inebriating most knights, though too much could be disastrous. Interestingly, some medieval armies had water carriers tasked with delivering clean water from wells or streams to soldiers, but their efforts were sometimes thwarted by the muddy, chaotic environment. One medieval chronicler described soldiers drinking from puddles when clean water ran out. Hardly the ideal preparation for battle. Historians still debate whether access to clean water was a deciding factor in the outcomes of some sieges and battles. Your thoughts turn to odd pre-battle snacks, like the medieval equivalent of an energy bar. You've heard that some knights carried small, dense cakes made of nuts, dried fruit, and honey, a kind of portable power snack. These cakes weren't as fancy as today's protein bars, but they packed calories and were easy to carry. You picture biting into one now. Sweet, chewy, a bit crumbly. Oddly enough, these energy cakes sometimes contained spices like ginger or pepper to add a little zing and perhaps stave off fatigue. You think about the importance of small comforts like these when every muscle aches and every breath is a challenge. The battle rages around you, but your body remains steady, fueled by food, spirit, and a stubborn will to endure. Even in the midst of war, it seems nourishment was a quiet kind of armor. Your armor feels heavier as the day wears on. But it's not just the metal weighing you down, it's the lingering hunger gnawing quietly beneath your ribs. The initial adrenaline rush has faded, and now the battle feels like a marathon, not a sprint. You wonder about the ways knights tried to keep their energy up during long campaigns, not just battles. Food had to last days, sometimes weeks, and not every campfire was stocked with fresh supplies. One surprisingly common ration was dried peas or beans, packed with protein and fiber. They were a reliable staple. You imagine the dull chewiness, maybe soaked overnight in water or broth to soften. In fact, some medieval recipes for battle rations included pea pottages, thick, hearty soups made from dried legumes and vegetables. These were easy to prepare in large pots and provided sustained energy. You think back to the smell of boiling stew, earthy, warm, promising relief after hours on the march. But here's a curious twist. Some medieval armies carried live animals along, like pigs or chickens, to slaughter for fresh meat when possible. Not exactly fast food, but it meant an occasional fresh meal in the middle of a rough campaign. Historians still debate how common this practice was, whether it was a widespread necessity or just something nobles bragged about in their letters. You glance at a nearby campfire, where a squire is carefully skinning a chicken, smoke curling into the cold air. Then there's the role of grains. Barley, oats, and rye were common ingredients in a knight's diet, often ground into coarse flour for bread or porridge. You remember hearing that barley was especially valued for its nutritional content and was sometimes soaked in beer to create a kind of energizing drink. You wonder if you'd ever be brave enough to try medieval barley beer. It's probably not the smoothest drink in the world. The concept of a pre-battle breakfast was less formal than you might think. Many knights ate what was available, when it was available, often scavenging on the march. But some sources mention rituals, like sharing a meal with fellow knights before battle, a kind of bonding, a moment to steel nerves and calm fears. You think of the familiar faces around you and the shared bite of bread or sip of wine as a quiet promise that you fight together, or fall together. Interestingly, the social aspect of food was as important as its nourishment. Even the smallest meal could boost morale. You reflect on the odd medieval belief that certain foods could imbue you with qualities you needed on the battlefield. Courage, strength, endurance. Garlic, for example, was thought to ward off evil spirits and boost vitality. Knights sometimes rubbed it on their bodies or ate it before a fight. Whether it worked or just gave them bad breath, it's hard to say. Historians still argue about how much medieval soldiers believed in these food-related superstitions versus practical nutrition. Your stomach rumbles softly, a reminder that despite armor and courage, hunger was always a real opponent. But for now, the shared meals, the stories passed around campfires, and the familiar taste of salted meat keep you steady. And somehow that feels enough as the sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky with soft amber and purple hues. Your thoughts drift once again to the food you've eaten today. The humble, steady fuel for a night's fight. The battle's chaos might be endless, but food remains a constant, a quiet anchor. You recall the clever use of herbs in medieval cooking, not just for flavor but for medicinal purposes. Rosemary, sage, and thyme weren't just kitchen staples. They were believed to boost memory, heal wounds, and ward off infections. Knights often carried small pouches of dried herbs, not unlike modern-day herbal remedies. You imagine the faint, comforting aroma of these herbs mingling with the smoke of the campfire. Historians still debate how effective these herbal remedies truly were, or whether their benefits were largely psychological. You take a deep breath, tasting the memory of a thyme-infused broth you once read about. Earthy, a little sharp, and oddly soothing. Then there's the curious case of garlic. More than just a flavor. Garlic was a medieval superstition powerhouse. It was said to protect against everything from evil spirits to the plague. Some knights even wore garlic cloves around their necks or tucked into their helmets before battle. You chuckle softly, wondering if anyone ever accidentally munched on their necklace during the heat of combat. Speaking of strange, did you know that medieval cooks sometimes used crushed mustard seeds as a seasoning? It added a pungent bite to stews and meats and was believed to stimulate digestion and circulation. Probably helpful before a long fight. You rub your stomach and imagine a spicy mustard stew. Not exactly a recipe for relaxation, but definitely energizing. Salted fish makes another appearance in your mind's eye. Dry, tough, and sometimes surprisingly tasty if prepared well. Coastal knights and soldiers had easier access to preserved fish, and it became an essential part of their diet. You recall stories of knights eating dried herring or cod during long campaigns. Historians still argue about how regional diets affected knightly performance. Did a diet heavy in fish give some an edge? Or was it all just about availability? Your gaze drifts to a nearby soldier carefully slicing a hunk of hard cheese, a prized source of fat and protein that could withstand weeks in a leather bag. Cheese, particularly hard varieties, was a medieval staple for a reason. Long shelf life, easy to carry, and decent nutrition. You wonder if the cheese you carry tastes as strong as some of those pungent medieval varieties. Probably. You think, it would clear your sinuses better than any battlefield adrenaline. The battle continues around you, but your mind lingers on these small, sensory details. The herbs, the spices, the texture of cheese and salted fish, as if they're your own secret armor. It's funny to think that in a world dominated by swords and siege engines, the humble herb garden might have been just as important. You imagine how different this battlefield would smell without the faintest hint of rosemary or garlic wafting on the wind. And somehow, that thought brings a little calm to the storm. The day stretches long, and the clatter of armor and hooves fades into a steady background hum. You find yourself thinking about the role of liquids beyond just wine and ale. Water, as you know, was notoriously unreliable and often unsafe. But did you know that medieval knights sometimes carried vinegar as a sort of antiseptic and flavor enhancer? That sharp tang wasn't just for salads. It had practical uses in the field. Vinegar could be added to water to make it safer to drink, or used to clean wounds. Some soldiers even drank diluted vinegar as a way to prevent scurvy or ease digestion. Historians still debate how widespread the use of vinegar was, and whether it truly helped with health issues, or was just another strange medieval habit. You think about the taste: sharp, sour, and a little shocking. Not exactly what you'd call a thirst quencher, but perhaps effective enough when clean water was scarce. There's also a strange tale about posca, a Roman-era drink made from vinegar, water, and herbs, which some believe persisted in various forms throughout medieval times among soldiers. You picture yourself taking a sip of posca, probably an acquired taste, like drinking salad dressing straight. Speaking of hydration, Some knights took to drinking broth or watered-down soups between skirmishes. This was practical. Not only did it hydrate, but it also provided nutrients. Camp cooks often made thick, salty broths from leftover bones, vegetables, and herbs. You've got to admire their resourcefulness. Nothing went to waste. And then there were the oddities. Medieval recipes that called for blood pudding or black pudding. Essentially sausages made from blood mixed with grains and spices. Not everyone's cup of tea. But these were rich sources of iron and protein. You can almost hear a nearby soldier grimace at the thought of eating something made with blood. But necessity often overrode squeamishness. Historians still argue how common blood pudding was among knights and soldiers. Some suggest it was more of a peasant food, while others believe it crossed social boundaries due to its nutritional value. You imagine the battlefield camaraderie around such a meal, sharing something tough and strange just to survive. And then there's honey, a sweet luxury you're lucky to have tucked away in a small jar. Besides its delightful taste, honey was prized for its preservative qualities and medicinal use. Knights used honey to soothe sore throats, treat wounds, and sometimes simply to sweeten their coarse bread. You think of the slow, sticky drip of honey, and how it might have felt like a tiny treasure amidst the grit of battle. With every bite, every sip, every small comfort, you're reminded that surviving a fight wasn't just about weapons and armor. It was about the quiet power of nourishment, resilience, and hope. And somehow, that makes the endless clang of steel just a bit easier to bear. Night falls gently now, and the cool air carries a different kind of quiet, one that invites reflection more than battle. You think about the strange foods knights might have eaten to calm nerves before the chaos resumed. One such oddity was the humble oat cake. These dense, flat cakes were made from oats and water, sometimes mixed with a bit of fat or honey. Not the most exciting fare, but reliable, portable, and surprisingly filling. You imagine biting into an oatcake, chewy, slightly nutty, and a little bland, but enough to keep your stomach from grumbling through the night watch. Historians still debate whether oatcakes were truly common or more of a regional specialty, favored in some parts of Europe but unheard of in others. Interestingly, oatcakes could be eaten plain or soaked in broth or ale to add some flavor and warmth. You picture a group of knights huddled around a campfire, dipping their oatcakes into a steaming pot of soup. Simple rituals that must have offered comfort. Then there's the use of dried fruits like raisins and figs. These were prized not just for their sweetness, but for their ability to store well and provide quick bursts of energy. You think about the contrast between the chewy, sugary fruits and the salty, tough meats, the balance of flavors and nutrition that medieval cooks somehow managed. You smile at the thought of a knight sneaking a handful of raisins from his pack when no one was watching. Perhaps the medieval equivalent of sneaking a candy bar. You remember reading that some monks, who often supplied food for knights and armies, experimented with recipes that combined dried fruit, nuts, and spices into dense travel cakes. Historians still argue how much influence monastic cuisine had on military rations, but it's clear that monasteries were centers of culinary innovation. You wonder if a knight's palate was more adventurous than you've given it credit for. Speaking of taste, let's not forget the importance of bread. Not just any bread, but coarse, dense loaves baked with rye or barley, often stale by the time they reached the battlefield. You imagine the hard crust scraping against your teeth, but somehow, it was a staple, a familiar piece of home in a strange and violent world. Interestingly, there's evidence that some knights dunked their bread in wine or ale, softening it and masking the stale taste. A medieval comfort food if there ever was one. You smile softly at the idea of wine-soaked bread, a simple pleasure amidst the harshness. As you pull your cloak tighter, you realize that in the end, food was more than just sustenance. It was a connection to life beyond battle, to family, home, and hope. And with that thought, you let the sounds of the night wash over you, your hunger momentarily eased by memory and imagination. The first hints of dawn stretch faint and pale across the horizon, a quiet promise after the long, cold night. As you prepare for what might be the day's final battle, your mind drifts to the elaborate feasts knights enjoyed when the war was momentarily on pause. Yes, knights had their share of indulgences, though feast might be a relative term compared to modern buffets. These meals celebrated victories or marked special occasions, sometimes even a brief ceasefire. One impressive staple was roast meats, venison, boar, and sometimes even swan. Not everyday fare, but the reward of a successful hunt or a noble's generosity. You can almost smell the crackling skin and hear the juices sizzling as the meat roasted over open flames. But here's a quirky fact. Medieval cooks often flavored their roasts with exotic spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, imported from faraway lands. These spices were expensive, symbols of wealth and prestige. You think about a knight savoring a bite of spiced venison, the warm cinnamon tingling his tongue. Definitely a far cry from the salted pork of the march. Historians still argue how much spice use varied by region and class. Was it truly common among knights, or mostly limited to the uppermost ranks? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Occasional splurges rather than daily staples. Feasts were also social events, a chance to bond, negotiate alliances, or simply forget the horrors of war for a night. They might include music, storytelling, and lots of wine, often flowing freely. You imagine the noise, laughter, and clinking of goblets, a vivid contrast to the battlefield's grim silence. Interestingly, some feasts featured elaborate dishes that doubled as conversation starters, like pies filled with live birds that would fly out when cut open. The medieval version of a party trick. You chuckle quietly, picturing the surprise and chaos that must have caused. Another favorite was pottage, a thick stew that could be enriched with meat, vegetables, and bread. Pottage was versatile, able to stretch to feed many, and was eaten by nobles and common soldiers alike. You think about dipping a crusty piece of bread into the savory broth, savoring the hearty flavors and the momentary comfort. These feasts were not just about food, but power and display, demonstrations of wealth, generosity, and status. You imagine a knight balancing the roughness of battle with the elegance of the banquet hall, caught between two worlds. And as the first rays of sunlight brighten the camp, you realize that food, whether humble or grand, was woven deeply into every moment of a knight's life. The battlefield quiets, and in that stillness, your thoughts wander to the odd superstitions surrounding food before combat. Knights weren't just warriors, they were believers in omens, rituals, and charms, many connected to what they ate. For example, there was a widespread belief that eating certain foods could protect a knight in battle. Garlic, of course, tops the list, but so did onions and even lentils. You imagine a knight carefully nibbling on a small onion, convinced it might keep his wounds from festering or his enemies at bay. Historians still argue whether these beliefs genuinely influenced dietary choices or were more of a comforting tradition amid uncertainty. Then there's the curious custom of knights avoiding certain unlucky foods right before battle. Things like peas, which some thought could cause bad luck or weakness. You smile at the idea of someone turning down a hearty stew just because it contained peas, tiny green scapegoats of misfortune. Another superstition involved salt, considered sacred and protective. Knights often carried a small pouch of salt, believing it could ward off evil or be sprinkled over wounds to speed healing. You picture the coarse grains sparkling in the firelight, a tiny but powerful talisman. One quirky practice was the belief that eating eggs before battle would make a knight brave and quick. Eggs, of course, were valued for their protein and versatility, but also took on a symbolic meaning. You imagine a knight cracking open an egg, hoping it might grant him a dash of courage. There's also the story of a knight who refused to eat anything but raw meat on the morning of battle, believing it would make him ferocious like a beast. You can't help but chuckle at that. Probably a tough breakfast to chew calmly before a fight. Historians still debate the extent to which these food-related superstitions shaped actual medieval diets. Were they occasional rituals or serious, daily practices? You lean back, letting the soft sounds of campfire crackling fill your ears, thinking about how food, superstition, and hope combined into one small but vital part of a knight's world. Because, after all, when the clang of swords rings loudest, sometimes it's the smallest comforts, like a garlic clove or a pinch of salt, that offer the greatest courage. Morning light filters softly through the camp, revealing a landscape both familiar and strange. A world where food and war intertwine more tightly than you might expect. Today, your thoughts turn to the remarkable influence of seasonality on a knight's diet. Medieval knights, unlike us with our year-round supermarkets, had to eat according to what the land and season provided. Winter meant preserved foods, salted meats, dried fruits, hard cheeses, and that trusty oatcake you remember from before. You picture the frost glinting on tents, the crunch of ice underfoot, and the warmth of a thick stew simmering over a low fire. Comfort in the cold. Summer, on the other hand, offered fresh fruits and vegetables, game freshly hunted, and an abundance of herbs to flavor meals. You imagine the bright, sharp taste of fresh berries, the snap of green beans, and the smell of newly cut hay blending with the campfire smoke. Historians still debate how much knights could really vary their diets during campaigns, especially in harsher seasons or hostile territories. Sometimes necessity forced a monotonous menu, regardless of the calendar. But when possible, they enjoyed seasonal treats like wild mushrooms, early spring ramps, or late autumn apples. You recall the curious medieval practice of eating salads, early versions of salads made with fresh herbs and greens, often sprinkled with vinegar and oil. Imagine a knight delicately picking at a small leaf of sorrel or parsley. A brief but refreshing break from heavier fare. Seasonal changes also influenced what could be stored. Honey and dried fruits were summer gifts preserved for leaner times. And don't forget the seasonal hunting. Stags and boars were more plentiful in certain months, making the feast richer and more varied. You reflect on the hard work it took to adapt meals to the seasons, the reliance on nature's rhythm both a blessing and a constraint. It's oddly comforting, thinking that knights, for all their armor and weaponry, shared something very human with us. The need to eat what's available, to find joy in fleeting tastes of the earth's bounty. You imagine the cycle of seasons gently turning, guiding knights' meals and moods alike, as steady and inevitable as the march of time. The day wanes, and your thoughts drift toward the complex relationship between food, honor, and hierarchy in knightly culture. You see that what a knight ate wasn't just about survival, it was also a statement, a reflection of rank and reputation. At the top of the chain were lavish dishes reserved for nobles, spiced meats, delicate pastries, and imported delicacies like almonds and citrus fruits. These foods displayed wealth and sophistication, a form of edible status. You picture a lord slicing into a golden, flaky pie filled with pheasant and prunes, the scent mingling with the murmurs of admiration around the table. But even among knights, access to such luxuries varied greatly. Many depended on the local countryside's offerings and what they could carry or forage. Historians still argue how strict these food boundaries really were. Did all knights truly eat the same diet? Or were there sharp divides between the elite and the rank and file? You think about the practical reality. A knight's purse often dictated his provisions as much as his title. At the lower end, simple meals of coarse bread, cheese, and salted pork were common, yet these too had their own quiet dignity. Then there's the curious case of food as a tool of diplomacy. Feasts were often held to impress allies or intimidate enemies, with carefully chosen dishes signaling alliances, generosity, or even veiled threats. You imagine a banquet where every plate, every wine poured, is loaded with meaning. A subtle chess game played with flavors and aromas. One quirky custom was the presentation of subtlety dishes, elaborate edible sculptures or surprise foods meant to dazzle and amuse guests. You can't help but smile at the idea of a knight trying to eat a pie shaped like a castle without destroying the artistry. Food also reinforced the bond between lord and vassal. Sharing a meal was a ritual of loyalty and trust, a momentary truce in a world often torn by conflict. You picture knights breaking bread together, the crackling firelight casting shadows on their faces, a fleeting peace sealed by shared sustenance. In this way, food was more than nourishment. It was the glue holding fragile social orders together, a language without words. And as twilight deepens, you feel the weight of that truth carried quietly in every bite a knight took. As the final shadows stretch long and soft, you settle deeper into the quiet moments before sleep takes you. Tonight's journey through the tastes and textures of knightly life is almost at its end. But there's a last gentle thought to savor. You reflect on the enduring legacy of medieval food, how the simple meals of soldiers and nobles alike have seeped into the rhythms of modern life. From rustic stews to rich roasts, many of the dishes knights once ate still echo in today's kitchens, albeit in far more polished forms. You imagine a bustling medieval kitchen, the scent of herbs mingling with roasting meat, the chatter of cooks and servers rushing to prepare a meal that sustains both body and spirit. Historians still debate exactly how much medieval eating habits influenced later culinary traditions, but the connections are undeniable. There's a quirky fact here. Some medieval recipes have survived almost unchanged, hidden away in old manuscripts, waiting to be rediscovered by chefs with a taste for history. You can picture a modern cook dusting off a centuries-old recipe book, trying to recreate a dish that once fueled knights before battle. And then there's the human element. The knights themselves, bound by duty and honor, finding small moments of comfort in food's warmth and familiarity. You feel that connection too. A thread stretching across time, linking your own knightly rituals to those of men long gone. Perhaps it's the universal need to find peace before facing the unknown. The quiet meal, the shared bread, the hopeful taste of something sweet or spiced. As you close your eyes, the sounds and smells of that medieval camp fade gently into a soft hush. You drift, knowing that these stories of food and battle, fear and hope, are more than history. They are echoes of our shared humanity, and with that, you let the night take you, cradled by the simple comforts of a meal well eaten and a story well told. Now, a soft wind down to ease you further into rest. The night deepens, slow and gentle, like a soft blanket drawn quietly across your shoulders. Imagine the flicker of a dying fire, its warmth fading but still comforting. As your breath grows steady and slow, feel your body relax, each muscle unwinding, releasing the day's weight. The world outside becomes a whisper, a distant hum, and your thoughts float like clouds drifting lazily across a twilight sky. There is nothing to rush toward, no battles to fight, just this peaceful moment suspended in time. The scent of herbs, the faint crackle of embers, the soft murmur of leaves outside. These are the lullabies of history, singing you gently to sleep. Let your mind rest on the simple pleasures, the taste of bread, the warmth of broth, the quiet companionship of shared meals across centuries. And as your eyes close, know that tomorrow holds new stories, new dreams. But for now, you are safe, cradled in the comforting embrace of night. Sweet dreams, dear listener.